In woodworking, building a basic box is often one of the first projects that beginners undertake or are told to undertake in order to learn the basics. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Learn to build a box and you can build anything"? While it's definitely important that anyone starting out understands the basic principles of joinery, measuring, cutting, and assembly that building a box can teach, I'd argue, and this was definitely the case for me, that building a basic cabinet was by far the most important step I took. So in this video, I'm going to go through the process of building a simple cabinet. It will feature all the critical components of a basic cabinet build. I'll also include free plans for those who wish to follow along. Before we start, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, DMS Fasteners. Yes, you heard that right, folks.
We've got ourselves a sponsor!
More about that later in the video. To start, I'm going to clean up the edges of the form ply. It's often a good idea to do that regardless of the material you're using, just to make sure that you're working with a nice clean edge. The first cut will be to cover the top and side panels of our cabinet. Next, we cut the sides to their final height. The next adjustment is to cut the width for the back panel and top panels. So now that we've cut our panels for the sides, for the back, and for the top and bottom, we can move on to creating the dados. Now, of course, for this project, you do not have to use dados if you don't want to or cannot use dados. There are certainly lots of different joinery techniques you can use that would all be certainly perfectly acceptable. So you could certainly use simple butt joints where you just simply butt the timbers at right angles and you drill directly into those ones. You could certainly use pocket screws. That's perfectly acceptable, especially in cabinetry like this. You could certainly then use also a router to make your dados instead. So if you still want to use dados, a router is a really good option. And I've certainly done that many times, especially with drawers. Or you could obviously also use your table saw and just make multiple passes and sneak up onto your dado fit. You can use any number of different methods. So just because I use a dado stack doesn't mean that you have to. You can certainly adapt this to whatever technique that you wish to use.
Certainly.
If you're wanting to follow along with this build and build this for yourself, but don't have access to dados or routers, or don't want to build it with that, you just want to use the simple butt joints like I mentioned, then I will be providing plans for both versions. So we're using the dado version of the plans. I will also provide a cutout list and build version of this that doesn't use dados, that just uses simple butt joints, which would be perfect for those users who want to just use screws or pocket screws. So to begin with the dados, let's start with the obligatory blade change montage. A while back I posted a video on making a zero clearance insert for my table saw. That insert was only for standard saw blades, so when it comes to dado stacks, I've been making do with the manufacturer insert, which to be frank is woeful. I finally got around to making one for the dados, and now is a perfect time to install it. The first dado position will cover the top section of the sides and back. The second will cover the bottom dado section. The final cuts with the dado stack are for the top and back panel. A sacrificial fence is used to ensure we don't damage our normal fence when cutting this type of rebate. When it comes to cutting panels for the insert dados, I find it's always better to measure to the actual size rather than rely purely on my pre-measurements. This ensures that you can get a perfect fit even if your dados are out just a fraction when it comes to the cut depth. Okay, let's talk a little bit about drawer slides now. Here's a basic drawer slide, nothing special here, very standard off the shelf from your local big box, in this case Bunnings. Installing a drawer slide will largely depend on whether or not you want to have a drawer that is inset from the cabinet, or if you want to have one that has the fascia of the drawer on the outside. What we mean by that is that if you wanted an inset drawer, would have the drawer face inside the cabinet, and an outset would obviously be on the outside. So depending on which one you choose will depend on where you want to place your drawer slide. If you want to do an inset door, what you want to do is take a piece of the face of the drawer that you're going to be using and inset that inside your cabinet and have your drawer slide butt up against that, and that's where you want to mount your drawer slide. If you're going to do a drawer slide where the drawer faces on the outside of the cabinet, then you'll want to push the drawer slide all the way to the edge so it's flush with the edge, and then that way your drawer will be on the outside. So we're going to do it this way today. Mounting the drawer slide is really easy, so once we've got it lined up, we can expand the drawer slide out. There'll be some holes or alignment holes. From there we can use something like a punch or an awl or even a pencil would probably do as well, just to make marks on where we're going to pre-drill our holes for our screws to mount our drawer slide. So we'll go ahead and do that. A handy tip that I learnt the hard way is to try and install your drawer slides before assembling your cabinet, especially if you know that access is likely to be a problem later on. For large cabinets this probably isn't a big deal, but for small cabinets like this one, it makes a lot of sense to install the drawer slides before we assemble the cabinet. With the drawer slides now installed, we can move on to making the drawer for the cabinet, and the first thing we do is measure the width between the two drawer slides. Next, measure the depth of your drawer. We want to make sure that we leave enough room at the back to allow for the front and the back of the drawer. I like to allow around double the width of the material I'm going to be using for the drawers, which in this case is about 16 millimeters. So I'm going to allow at least 30 millimeters from the back of my drawer. For the drawer height, I like to allow at least 5 millimeters clearance for both the top and for the bottom. This will give our drawer a total height of 100 millimeters. So now that we have our height, we can cut our stock for the drawer on the table saw. When it comes to which material to make your drawers out of, I tend to use MDF, which is readily available through your big box store. MDF is pretty versatile to work with, it's easy to cut, and one of the key benefits is that there is basically no movement when it comes to expansion contraction. If you do choose MDF for your drawers, do be careful because cutting it is quite messy and you really don't want to breathe in the tiny fibers that cutting MDF produces. Ensure that you have adequate ventilation and that you always wear your dust mask. Using our crosscut sled, we'll clean up the drawer pieces and cut them to final length. A good crosscut sled is a must-have jig for your table saw, but if you don't have one, you could certainly use a miter saw instead. To create the rebates for the drawer, I'm going to do that on the router table. As I covered earlier, there are many ways in which you can create dados and rebates, so use the method that works for you. The third and final cut for our drawer frame is to make the groove that accepts our bottom panel. Our panel bottom is 6mm thick, so we need to create at least a 6mm groove in all four sides, and to achieve this I'll use yet another technique on the table saw. With each pass over the table saw, we simply bump the fence over a fraction and work our way up to getting the right friction fit. So we have our basic drawer now complete. We've done our grooves to accept our bottom panel, and we've done our rebates to accept the sides here. I do tend to prefer this method of building drawers, not because it is faster or necessarily simpler. The rebates and the grooves, it tends to help with alignment, with keeping it square, and it also means that you can assemble them quite quickly. So I do prefer this method. The next thing that we're going to do is make the floating panel that goes inside the groove. The groove that I've cut here is a 6mm groove, and I'm going to use obviously 6mm MDF for the construction. Relatively easy to work out how big the panel will need to be. We know that the length of it will be identical to this size of piece. For the width, it's going to be, we measure from the edge here to the outside edge. So why we do that is we're allowing for this thickness, and essentially if we divide this thickness in half, that's what the distance inside this dado is going to be. So it'll work out that if we measure from here to here, we'll get a distance or a gap that's right in between these two. With a successful dry fit, we can now assemble our drawer. When it comes to gluing, it's really only critical that we do that for the four corners. For the floating bottom panel, while it is okay if you're using something like MDF to apply a little bit of glue, for any other type of wood, don't do it. You want to allow that panel to float and expand and contract as necessary to avoid having the drawer crack or change shape in the future. I like to run a few brad nails to secure the drawer while the glue dries. You can, if you prefer, use some clamps instead. After a quick sanding, we can check the fit. Ideally, what we are looking for here is a loose friction fit. If you find that the drawer is binding slightly, try sanding down the sides a little. A couple of 5mm spacer strips will allow us to lift the drawer off the bottom and make it easy to attach the drawer slides. When it comes to screwing into MDF, I recommend that you pre-drill. It'll make life a lot easier. It can be very difficult to screw directly into MDF, but if you're using another material like plywood, then you can probably skip doing that. Be careful when screwing into MDF. It's really easy to over tighten the screws, causing it to strip out the hole, and then there's nothing left for the screw to bond to. Once you have the first few screws in on each side, you can then take the drawer out so that you have access to the back screws. If everything has gone to plan, we should now have a fully functioning drawer. With our cabinet drawer now complete, we can move on to the assembly, and what better time to quickly talk about today's sponsor, DMS Fasteners. Like so many of my fellow woodworkers, hobbyists and DIYers, I use a lot of fasteners. Having a good assortment on hand at all times can not only be difficult, but also really expensive, especially if you're like me and your closest source is from a big box store. Locally owned, operated in Melbourne, Australia, DMS Fasteners offers a wide range of high quality fasteners, including nuts, bolts, screws and more. One of the best things about DMS Fasteners is their free express shipping offer. That's right, no matter how big or small your order is, you'll receive it in no time at all.
Hey, that rhymes.
This is especially great for those of us who need our fasteners quickly for urgent projects or tight deadlines. So why am I excited by this? Well, I think everyone remembers my workstation assembly bench upgrade, where I installed all of these wonderful tote systems. When I built this, you would have thought, oh, I must have populated it with a whole bunch of things. These are all empty. I haven't had anything to put in them till now. So if you're looking for a reliable and trustworthy source for fasteners, then give DMS Fasteners a try. I'll have links in the video description, and don't forget to use our special discount code at checkout to receive 10% off your purchase. Thanks again to Damien and the guys over at DMS Fasteners for supporting Aussie channels like myself. Now that we have our fasteners, we can go ahead and assemble our cabinet. As this is a workshop furniture project, I'm using screws, no glue here, as you never know if you might want to repurpose or modify the cabinet in the future. You can of course use your fastener of choice, or even just glue alone if you'd prefer to avoid visible screw holes. When assembling your cabinet, it's a good idea to use some clamps just to make sure that everything is lined up and flush. Now that we've assembled the cabinet, we're on the home stretch, so we're going to turn our attention to installing the drawer front and the door panel. To do this, we simply measure the width and the height that we want for both and cut them to size on the table saw. For the hardware, I'm going with these thumb drawer pulls that I have on hand left over from previous projects. When it comes to attaching drawer fronts to a drawer, there are many different techniques you could use. I'm choosing the simplest one here, which is to simply clamp the front to the cabinet and then drill through the front for my hardware. Another way that you could do this if you can't clamp it would be to use some double-sided tape to attach the drawer front to the drawer itself and then drill through for your hardware. Next, we place a couple of clamps on the drawer face to secure it so that we can drive a couple of screws in from the inside. For the doors, I'm going to be using some very common Euro-style overlay hinges. These hinges are pretty easy to install, but can be a little intimidating for first-timers. Most of these style of hinges will require you to bore a hole in the inside of the cabinet door to accept the cup of the hinge. The size of this cup can vary a little, but common sizes are between 26 and 35 millimeters. The hinge I'm using has a 26mm cup, so in my drill press I've installed a 26mm Forstner bit. You of course don't need to use a drill press, you could just as easily do this freehand with your cordless drill, but obviously be very careful when doing so and ensure that you don't drill through your door. When it comes to where you should drill this hole, it will depend obviously on your particular hinge. Regarding the location of where to drill this cup, you should consult the guide that's generally included by the manufacturer for your particular hinge. A useful tip when lining up your hinges is to use a square against the edge. Ensuring that your hinges are parallel will certainly make installing your door much simpler. With our hinges now attached to our door, it's time to attach the door to the cabinet. Installing doors in the vertical position can be tricky, but if your cabinet is small enough, a cheat way is to lay the cabinet on its side and butt the door up against it. Most of these cup style hinges will have a means to make slight adjustments to the alignment, So play around with these till you get the perfect fit, and then tighten everything to lock your settings in. To finalize our build, I'm going to add casters to this cabinet. I'm recycling these casters from my previous assembly build upgrade. At this point, the cabinet is pretty much complete. Casters is a purely optional accessory. You can of course customize your cabinet any way you like by adding feet or rubber pads or no feet at all and simply have it sit on the floor. I guess the point of this video is to sort of demonstrate that if you can build something like this simple cabinet, then the reality is you can build just about anything when it comes to furniture. You could easily adapt this to be part of a desk. Join a few together and make a side table or workbench top. Or even a simple tool cart for your most important tools. The creative possibilities are essentially endless. So why not give a basic cabinet a try, because you never know what kind of project that this could eventually turn into. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.